So, once again, transformation versus scaling. And scaling, you notice I just had there over the product program area. Transformation is all 4 boxes. It has to happen organization-wide in all 4 areas simultaneously. You simply can't touch one area without impacting the other 3 areas. And if you only try to do one area, you could very much increase the risk of negatively impacting those other 3 areas. So if you want your scaling to be successful, you'd better be doing your transformation at exactly the same time and helping people as they're coming up the tool set curve, they have to be coming up the mindset curve, and both have to happen at the same time, or you're going to increase your probability of failure again by multiple factors. One of the things that we use and have used down through the years, VSPT here on the right originally came from the West Point Military Academy. They had vision, strategy, projects, and tactics. And that was used in the 90s by Newt Gingrich as their leadership model and as their transformation model to be able to take over Congress after Bill Clinton got elected in 1992. The Republicans worked very hard to win both the House of Representatives and the Senate back. And so in 96, by 96, they had already won it all back. Newt Gingrich used this as one of his key tools, borrowing from West Point Military Academy's leadership model at that point in time. He used this. Now, we modified it over time, and originally we had vision, strategies, projects, and tasks. But in the end, we realized that it goes way beyond projects, folks. This goes to the helping the entire organization succeed, and so we switched it from projects to people, as we have here. And you'll notice that there's a line in between vision, strategy, and people and tasks. That line there represents the disconnect between the vision and strategies of the organization and the people and the tasks. And the more layers that you have in your organization, in your organizational hierarchy, the thicker and bigger that line gets. And so that disconnect is there. And so we use and we start with VSPT in the organization box, but we also use it in the product box, the team box, and the individual box. And all of those have to align. And we use various tools to do that, but we'll come back to that a little bit later. The AHA curve and transformation. Portions of this is also included in the transformation slide deck. And so, but I'm not going to pull those slides over to here because I have some additional slides here that aren't included in the transformation slide deck. So they'll be close, but they're not going to be exactly the same. The AHA curve is something that I put together out of exasperation when I was working in Stockholm back in about 2015. And the slides after this will help explain why I was getting exasperated. I was working with consultants and they didn't understand bell curves apparently. And like I said, I was a little exasperated. I just went up to the whiteboard, thought for a second, and drew this picture and said, look, you got people who are struggling, people who are going through the motions. You get to this point where they get to AHA, and then they start to perform, and ultimately through good coaching and mentoring, you'll get them to high performance, and I walked them through the difference between what I meant for hands-on and hands-off. And please understand, hands-on does not mean micromanagement. And if you have confused it for micromanagement, you have misunderstood drastically what we've been trying to teach you. Now, that doesn't mean it won't happen and that people won't fall back into their comfort zones, but the Scrum Master, the Agile Coach, the Enterprise Agile Coach should at least raise the issue and say, hey, we're seeing micromanagement. What's your plan, Mr. or Miss or Mrs. Scrum Master, to get the team back on track and to have the stakeholders or the product owner to have them stop micromanaging? Okay? Or if it's the Scrum Master themselves, then you take them out back to the woodshed, have a come to Jesus meeting, and then let them come back in the building, maybe. So one way or the other, you need to be able to understand. Hands-on does not mean micromanagement, and hands-off does not mean laissez-faire, do whatever you want. Okay? So, and it's the same for top-down, bottom-up. The Agile purists prefer only the organic bottom-up way of scaling Agile. I believe that there needs to be a top-down as well as a bottom-up approach. Here's the original bell curve that I had done. And I was just sort of looking at the difference between struggling teams and individuals and high-performing teams and individuals. And at one of the companies that I worked with, when I got there January 3rd or 4th, whenever it was, 2011, in the previous year they had been able to deliver 58 projects. And the teams, when we interviewed the team leads and found out where they were at, it was roughly a 50-50 sprint or split on who was struggling and who felt that they were actually performing, let alone high performing. And so struggling and high performing, those are the outliers, and going through the motions and performing are closer to the center line. Now, on the average, we didn't move everybody up the curve, okay? We got maybe half a dozen of the teams out of the 18 teams to actually show some movement and move to the next highest level of performance. But even that small movement over a couple year period of time, so by 2013, we're talking 2011, 12, and 13. By 2/3 of the way through the year in 2013, the teams were on track to deliver 124 projects per year with 10% less people. So we went from 250 down to about 225, 220, something like that. And the leadership of the organization decided not to replace almost any, well, maybe they replaced some, but we went down by about 10%. So if we lost 15% of the people, they only replaced, 3, 4, 5% of them. So we did more with less, and it took 2 years to get there, or 2.5 years to get there, to start delivering at that velocity. Now the teams were dedicated, persistent teams, and instead of assigning the team members to projects, we reversed it and had the projects assigned to the teams. So these teams had been working together, most of them by this time, for at least a couple of years. So the same thing in using the AHA curve, it's the same thing. I think we had 2 teams that were struggling, and we got one of the teams to move up to going through the motions. And of the going through the motions team, or we reduced it from 2 to 1. So we got one of the teams to go up. And on the motions team, we reduced it from 7 to 5, so 2 of the teams went up to performing. On the performing, we went up to 9, and the high performing, they went up by 1. It was something like that. And so the AHA curve moved over to the left, and we had more teams that were on the right than on the left. So you don't have to have everybody with, okay? And it's the same idea for any kind of transformation that you're going to do. This is still valid. You don't have to have everybody with in order to be able to do the transformation. You only need a portion of the people with to get exponential doubled results within a relatively short period of time when you look at the big scheme of things. So this was, for me, a powerful aha, because it's both the law of averages and the flaw of averages, okay? And there's a lot of people who have done a lot of presentations on the flaw of averages, but if you understand the power of the law of averages, especially when you're working from the program level and up, you'll go a long way and you'll add tremendous value to the organization with which you are working. And as I shared in the transformation slide deck, the reason that the journey is long is because you have to go through individual transformations, team transformations, transformations for the product, program, process, line management area, and transformations for the portfolio level and up to the directors and VPs and executives and C-level that are leading the organization. And so transformations take time. And you can score the transformations as the teams are going along. So you could have the individual team members vote where they're at, do an aggregate score like we did in the team box that represents all the votes above in the individual area. I showed a real picture of this in the transformation slides, so we know that this works. The product owner felt that they were still barely going through the motions and felt that it was zombie agile. And we as the consultants, we had scored the organization at somewhere between struggling or scrumbling, as one of our participants from one of our customers coined the phrase. That was awesome, by the way. They were struggling, and we put them somewhere between struggling and going through the motions. And going through the motions can end up looking like and feeling like zombie agile, where everybody's just sort of walking with their arms outstretched and they're battered, bloodied, and bruised, and looking like zombies, going, this isn't fun. So it's really important to know and to track and to, over time, be able to give trend lines. How are our teams moving up the curve? It's going to take you anywhere from 5 to 7 years to do a complete transformation if what is taught in the literature and in the journal articles is true. And this picture here is a pretty good explanation of why that's the case. Okay, it's going to take a ton of time. Now, using the principles of flow and showing what I showed on the previous slides on how the teams had moved up the curve relatively quickly, you can see that it's possible to cut that time in half. So we had transformed a 250 person organization in a 2.5 year period of time. And guess what? That also scales. Because if you can do it with 250, you can do it with 2,500, you can do it with 25,000. There are ways to scale up to larger sizes and get that kind of transformation across the board. But the executives and the leadership have to be willing to go on the journey themselves and demonstrate great leadership, and be willing to invest in the time and the effort that it's going to take to get everybody up the curve. As I really hammer home in the transformation video series, it is impossible to do a change in only one of these 4 areas without impacting the other 3. In other words, if you're going to do any kind of change effort, any kind of transformation, whatever, if you're doing a transformation in the product area or the program area, and you're not doing it with the individuals, teams, and the rest of the organization, you're setting yourself up for failure. Now, if you want to succeed and do it right, you need to do the change and transformation in all 4 boxes at the same time. And a lot of organizations will be, oh, whoa, we can't do that. We're 150,000 people. Well, don't do it by 150,000. Figure out which divisions that you can do where it makes sense, like Ericsson did. They did their R&D division. They did a transformation 10 years ago, and it's still going. And so external consultants helped Ericsson build their internal capacity to be able to not only deliver the transformation, but to sustain the transformation and make it sustainable.